All right. I am so thrilled to have in conversation today a good friend, Terrence Talley, who is a speaker that works with youth in school assemblies and youth camps. And I've known Terrence for a few years, and we're going to continue in our conversation over what has happened recently uh, with these issues of uh, police shootings and lynchings. There's no other way
Yeah.
to say it with Ahmaud. But uh, and so, Terrence, I am just so glad you could be with us. Could you just give us a background of what you're doing and what where you're living and how are things going where you are?
Yeah. So pre-pandemic, I was able to travel around and go to schools like you were saying. And that has been like one of my driving forces is not just to go to schools, but to just love students.
Yeah.
So wherever those students are, whether it's in a public setting or a Christian setting, it's just like I need to go and love students.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was doing. And even now, since everything has happened, we started doing these virtual live assemblies.
No kidding.
Yeah, and it's been really awesome. Like when it first started, I was just like, oh, this is terrible. I don't want to do this. This is dumb. But as we've gotten used to it now, when we added different elements, it's turned into something where it was just like, I never thought it could be this way. Like, this is actually pretty cool.
Nice.
And I think for me, that has been the theme for this whole thing, is not being a victim of the pandemic and the victim of things that are happening. But this is a moment where God is asking, it's time to do something new. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change your mission or change how we reach people, but it's all about, okay, how am I going to do that differently? How am I going to reach students differently right now? Because whether this happened or not, God wanted some kind of change. And I could sit there and whine about it and be like, man, I miss doing school assemblies. I miss dancing with teachers. But it's like, no, God is introducing something new, and I'm not going to be left behind mourning what's lost. And so, yeah, we started doing that, and it's been going well. And then obviously with everything happening right now, it has started something new even within me to be able to speak more out against this. Because like you were saying, I was at the church 4 years ago, and we did this thing. I don't even remember if we were talking before recording or during recording.
Yeah. So that was before. So
Okay.
yeah, just 4 years ago when I was pastoring up in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, and we had asked you to come. It was after the shooting of Philando Castile.
Yes. And in Minneapolis as well. And so it started to bring up even then, like, man, I need to speak more about these issues, but I always just felt uncomfortable doing it because I feel like, for me, I always felt like I had to stay silent about these things because, truth be told, I grew up in the suburbs. And growing up in the suburbs, I always thought, man, people are not going to recognize my situation. They're going to look at it and be like, oh, well, you had it good, and you got to grow up in this area where you're not dealing with this. But I knew in my heart of hearts, like, that is not true. And instead of it being apparent, I had to deal with the covert of it all, and just the undertones, and just why am I not getting able to get into this class at school, or why am I constantly being pulled over in my neighborhood that I live in? And even dealing with the whole, like, at school, I'm alone. Like, there is nobody like me. And so for me, I always felt like, man, I don't know if I can speak about these issues. I don't know if it's going to relate to anybody. But now with everything coming up, I've noticed that the more I started to talk about it, more people are like, okay, I understand that. And I get that. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay, God, you're even letting me do something new. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And you grew up in Burnsville, right?
Yes.
Then that's a suburb of the Twin Cities. So,
Hmm.
and then, yeah, and I think you must have still been living in the cities when I had asked you about Philando Castile.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we reconnected because last week, I was just on this journey. I'd talked to a couple of different folks about Ahmaud Arbery, Marlena Graves, who's an author and activist, and Dennis Edwards, who's a professor, and he had pastored in North Minneapolis at Covenant Church, and Sanctuary. I think it's called Sanctuary Church, but it's a Covenant Church. And talked about them, and I'm thinking I want to keep this conversation going. And so I messaged you on Tuesday morning about that, and
Hmm.
you got back to me and said, absolutely, let's do this. Have you heard about Minneapolis?
Right.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, what happened? You know?
Like what?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you sent me the video, that first video, the one that we're all so familiar with now, and then a news story. So give me your reactions out of that. I mean, that
Yeah.
was just so
So
heartbreaking.
yeah, I think you were actually the first person I messaged after it all happened, or when I first saw the video. And I literally woke up to it, where I looked to see the time on my phone as I was waking up, and I noticed somebody put an article about, uh, black man dies by a cop. And I was like, this can't be happening again. And I open it up, and I'm sitting there, and I am just, I have no words to say. And there are so many feelings happening. And even at that time, my wife was like, are you okay? And I'm like, look at this. And it was one of those moments of, you talk about these things happening. And I always had to deal with people like, well, are you sure that happens? Are you sure that's like something that's all over? And especially in Minnesota,
Yeah.
everybody feels like we've gotten past that and it's over. And if you try to bring up something, they're just like, well, you're kind of making a mountain out of a molehill, sort of a thing. And this is a one-time situation. And then it was in that moment, as I'm watching this video, where I'm just like, I know they're going to try to say this isn't real, or even reading it and seeing that they didn't even charge that cop at that time.
Right.
Like, it took how many days? Like 3 days, 4 days?
3-4 days. Yeah.
So this man was able to walk free. And as I'm reading this that morning, I was just like, they did not catch this guy? Like, did he run off and we can't find him? Like, I was trying to figure it out. I was like, there's no way that he was able to just go home that night and just have dinner.
Wow.
And for me, it was just like, this is our biggest fear, is that it can happen in broad daylight and everybody will just let it go.
Yeah.
It just grew, I honestly, I became scared, because it was just like, I'm not too far away from that, because like you were saying, we're in Minneapolis. I know the streets that all this stuff is happening. I
Yeah.
know.
We knew those places.
Right, exactly. Even though that area wasn't an area I frequented a lot, because it was like, oh, this area is rough.
It is a rough area. Yeah.
But I still been there and I knew about it, and it's just like, wow, it could happen to me.
Yeah.
I could have just even going to school around in that area. That could have been me.
Yeah.
And that's been come up so many times, but to actually like see it up close, like even with Ahmaud, it was just like, oh my goodness, like this happened 3 months ago, and now they're releasing the video, and they didn't even charge the guys then. And even watching online, some of the people trying to explain it away, and it just made me so upset. And then now waking up to it, not only having a far away video, but a video like right there, and you see that his life leave his body, everybody, it, I don't know, I can't speak for every Black American, but I know for me, it was like the worst fear. Like, you just watch somebody die and you're okay with that. I will never forget that moment.
Yeah. And you had talked about, there have been times you've just been pulled over, like in Coon Rapids. You had a ticket the night you spoke to us about Philando Castile. Talk about some of those incidents.
Yeah, I remember I've gotten actually a couple different tickets for going 5 over the speed limit. We're talking 5 over. Everybody, I have never met one person that's like, I have never gone over the speed limit. I've always driven the speed limit. Everybody knows there's that like almost 10 like, grace thing where it's just like, all right, 10 over, or you're going 10, slow down. It was in that week that I had gotten 2 tickets just going 5 over. And I was just so like, can't you guys see this? Like, this right here, this is happening to me. And the sad thing is, that wasn't just the first time. That was in a series of just times that has happened. And I was telling somebody else recently, around Black people, we don't ever ask like, hey, have you ever encountered racism? That question doesn't get asked. It's more like, when did that happen to you? Yeah. Oh yeah, that happened to you when? Oh yeah, mine was a few days ago. And so it's conversations like that.
Wow.
So I think one of the biggest frustrations with everything is having to prove my pain and hurt to somebody else. That drives me crazy.
Yeah. And I think you talked about back then as well with your wife, and you've been pulled over. She was driving and they asked her about her well-being. Is that right?
Yeah. Like, are you okay, ma'am? And it's like, you serious right now? Like, I'm married to this woman. Like,
yeah.
They've asked me, okay, is she here willingly? And that happened while we were dating. And it's so humiliating.
Yeah.
Especially to have that, and in case nobody knows, my wife, she's white. And so to have it in that moment, it's just like, you as a man, you're supposed to be able to protect and show that you have this, I am strong for my family. And to just be so downgraded in that moment, like, well, you're still a dangerous guy and it doesn't matter, ma'am, are you okay? Because you got to watch out for people like him. It's just, those are moments you try to comprehend and live with, but it's.
Yeah. What, just some thoughts on how you've seen response, and I mean, there's been the protests and there's been things like that in Minneapolis and things. And I think sometimes we're going to, my fear is we're going to get lost in the minutia of argument about protests and the types of protests and stuff. But with that, the protests, other responses, like with different people that you would say, are there different responses, say, than 4 years ago with Philando Castile that you're seeing at all? Like 4 years ago, maybe they weren't buying it, but this year they're like, whoa, what is going on? I don't know if you've had that experience.
No, my wife and I are actually talking about that a couple of days ago, where it's just like, at first I was just like, man, we're just dealing with the same thing over and over again. And she reminded me, she was like, actually, I'm encouraged. Not encouraged that this happened, obviously, but encouraged by a lot of the response of people going, no, that was wrong. And that shouldn't have been done. And now I see a more willingness to listen. And even for me, I've had a lot more people ask me questions like, hey, what did you think? Terrence, I'm sorry. Please tell me what it is I can do. There's way more of that happening right now, instead of me going back and forth with somebody trying to tell them, no, this is wrong and this is why this is wrong. And it has been a really just hopeful experience to see that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm not just saying this to you because I'm talking to you right now, but I feel like you guys were the trailblazers. Like, you guys were asking those questions, and you guys had a heart for those things before all of a sudden it became the new thing.
I
And that's
appreciate
what I
that.
appreciated about you, and not only just you, but your church and Brenna, where
And
it's just
Brenna Zyment, yeah, who is with us, and now she's out there blasting away too.
right. And you guys literally, you were ahead of the time before you even knew it. Your heart was in the right place, because I don't believe that God is just like, okay, now we're going to care about these things. But God cared about those things, and you guys were right along with it before we even got into this. And so I appreciate, if anybody's watching, this is not just Pastor Dan like having a heart for these things now that it's come up. Like, you have had a heart for these things. What is it, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, 4 years ago this July. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, no, I
I
appreciate
appreciate that so much. Thank you.
it.
You know, and it really meant so much to us that you led that conversation in that coffee shop, because we had folks from the city that were there, and to hear Black families talk about how they train their boys. One family was there talking about they had 3 boys, and we raised 3 boys, and you just get that sense of we raise boys in different worlds, because they talked about when we get pulled over, this is what you do, not if you
Right.
get pulled over. It's when we get pulled over. Here, I need you to do this, and you to do this, and you to do this. And that was that was that was just one of those moments for all of us. And then you with that ticket right there for getting pulled over just a few days before for being
Yeah.
Black,
Yeah.
and my wife and I were just like, we just came home and just like, this can't stay this way. What are we doing?
Yeah.
So
It was my daughter. So when that happened, I think I just had my youngest daughter. She's 4, about to turn 5. And then my oldest daughter, she's 7 and 2 weeks, about to turn 8. And I had always hoped that I didn't have to do that for my daughters.
Yeah.
And see, you're gonna make me cry.
Yeah.
But 2 days ago, I had to have that same conversation with them, and just trying to break down everything, where it was just like, okay, yeah. She goes, why did the police do that to him? And we're like, yeah, it was because he was Black. And I tried to like get up the courage, but then my wife stepped in and she goes, okay, so if the police tell you good, we like the police, we don't hate all police. And she goes, but if they were to pull you over, you have to stay calm. And we talked about how if the police want you to do something, or you be respectful, but you just tell them, I'm going to wait for my parents to come. And my heart just dropped, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have this conversation with my little girls.
Right.
And I hate that I have to do that. And so now I'm like driven more so now. And I'm like, my little girls will not have that conversation with their kids.
Yeah.
We'll change this now. So
yeah. What are some things that we can be doing in this moment, and then moments moving forward? What are some things you've been thinking about?
yeah. Shoot, man, why are you trying to make me cry?
I've been crying all week. It's time for somebody else to cry.
I'm sorry, repeat that question again.
I was just wondering, you've had this conversation with your daughters, and your determination is that they don't have to have this with their kids. And and what are some things we can do as believers just to move it forward in this moment, to help get you to that place, to get this generation of kids to where they don't have to have that conversation anymore? What do
Yeah.
you think?
Well, I honestly, it's this right here. It is asking those questions. And I know a lot of people, even when you bring up Black Lives Matter, it's like, whoa, wait a minute now. That's not exactly what I'm about.
All lives matter. Blue lives matter.
Oh my goodness. I was going to pull my hair out. But it is.
I did.
I feel you, man. I didn't, but I feel you. I understand. But it is about the church confronting some of their bias and being real about it and being like, you know what? I think this way, but am I thinking the right way about things like Black Lives Matter? Do I need to look at myself and say, okay, is everything that I think the right thing? And it's challenging that. And not only just challenging that, but being open to listen. Because a lot of times when people are like, yeah, I just want to know what you think, then it's just like, well, what about this situation? And I'm like, you're not listening. You're trying to your point. You're trying to get backup or ammunition for why you believe what you believe. Yeah. But just go into the conversation and truly listen. Right. And then also for the church, I wish they gave more opportunity to share their seat at the table of decisions, at the table of power, so to speak.
That's good.
And it's really hard to continue to have these conversations when somebody is like, well, I'm going to ask Terrence. It's almost like the story of the teacher of the law coming to Jesus at night and asking him, hey, what do I need to do to do this? And it's like, why are you doing this at night? Let's talk about this during the day when everyone's around. Were you showing that you have respect for me as Jesus Christ? And I think that is what the church needs to do, is not ask my opinion when we're on a one-on-one conversation, but and when I say I, not me, right. Terrence, but right. Have a person of color at that seat where you guys are making decisions and saying, hey, we need to listen to what they have to say too. And it's important. And not when something comes up, not just when some Black issue, some race issue is happening, but in all your issues. How are we going to do this event? Well, hopefully you're going to want all different races and creeds at your event. So we need your perspective on this as well. And I think those are the things that we need to do in order to make this right. Now, there's a lot that we can get into where it's like, well, we got to break down some systems too. We got to break down.
There are some systems, right?
Right. We got to break down the educational system because that is flawed, and there's a whole lot that can go on that. We got to break down the housing situation, and when we're talking about redlining and all that, but then also we got to talk about jobs and employment situations. And so being able to, these three systems in general is like, man, we really need to do that. But before we get into that, you got to get to know me. And so.
Yeah. We do have to be able to talk about those systems. You know, I mean, I think one of the things that is just so misconstrued, you know, moving from Minnesota to Alabama, I have Minnesota friends who kind of look down on me for where I've moved to, you know, and I get it. I get it. You know, I wonder myself sometimes, except I live an hour from the Gulf of Mexico and I got white sand beaches.
I get, oh, Lord bless you.
But the other thing is that I think that because of that sometimes we get so stuck in our goodness and our Minnesota niceness that we don't want to really address those things. So I was I think it was video. I maybe even had seen it today or posted it today, but she was going through the statistics on racial disparities in education, and top near the top of the list, she said, "You think these are all Southern problems? These are not Southern problems." And
No.
out of that top 20, several were Midwest, including Minnesota, on racial disparity, income disparity, all of those things. And we need to have those discussions to be able to move things forward, and I mean, yeah, even the systemic things, like, when those riots broke out and the protests broke into riots, and they shut down the grocery stores. So now these neighborhoods that need food the worst and have had issues already because the pandemic has shut down schools that were feeding kids,
Yep.
and now they can't get food because the grocery stores are closed, and there are these systems that need to be dealt with. And then the other thing with the protests that have how about, you're in the Milwaukee area? How have things been there with reaction to all of this?
Yeah. So I think Milwaukee has been relatively like, hey, we're going to do this peacefully, but we're also going to let them know our voice be heard. So even yesterday, there were 2 protests, and I was with my pastor at one of them, and it was awesome. Like, I was even blown away. And I wrote about this, and I posted this on my page, but just walking down a street, and my pastor's Black, but then like right next to us is this like crazy looking white dude, and he's yelling Black Lives Matter. He's yelling louder than I am. And it was the most like, what? I'm like, where am I at right now? But it just felt so good.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I didn't have to scream in order to be heard, because I truly had a brother with me that was like, I'm going to scream for you.
Yeah, that's great. And the thing that I have, like, Milwaukee has nothing to do with what happened to George Floyd, but for them to move forward in a public display like that has just been.
Well, I think that's the huge thing. And that speaks to how big of a moment that really happened, and what that tape did. And that's why I know where my moment was when I first saw it was not just me, but it was all of us going, that's it. It's now plainly right in front of us. And so, yeah, absolutely.
And we've got to confront this,
Right.
And we have to press at it. One of those things, what might be some things for us in a practical sense, because here's what I fear.
Yeah.
With Ahmaud Arbery and with this situation, I think with Ahmaud Arbery, when this video got leaked, and then they finally, they kicked the can until somebody finally had to pick it up. But they arrested the 2 guys first, and then the guy that videoed it. And then with George Floyd, they've arrested the first officer. What do we need to realize, honestly, when, say, the other 3 officers are arrested, and there's this tendency to go, okay, whew, good. You know what I'm saying? We kind of let up and forget about it. What's the work we still need to do in something like that?
Right. So I think number one, look at, once again, what's making you feel awkward. What's making you go, okay, I want to move on from this. Why? Why do you want to move on this? What is it that makes you feel like, I don't want to deal with this no more? Because if we're talking and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like one issue is more important than another, but think about it even this way. With human trafficking, there's not a one person that's like, well, let's not talk about human trafficking right now. We don't have to deal with that no more. Right. No, you go to anybody and they're like, yeah, we got to fight that. This is a great evil that we have to fight. Yeah. And you have to think about this in that same exact way, because this isn't like a movie where we're fighting some villain. We're fighting an idea.
Yeah.
And sometimes that idea is in you.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the first thing that you should do is to create that connection with somebody of color.
Okay.
And like, all right, look, I want to know more about this. And I need to start a relationship with you. And one of my friends was joking. He was like, so you just want me to find a black dude and be like, we're going to be friends because you're black. I'm like, okay, don't say that. Awkward for everybody. But to literally go out of your way and saying, hey, I appreciate you and I want to have this mean something more than a period of time. I need to make sure that I get to know you more, and we're gonna be friends and we're gonna talk this through. Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the things you can do now. Because when it comes to people, it's real easy to be like, hey, I see you on the street. Hi, sorry that happened to you. But when it's your friend, then it's something that you can't just, because when something else goes down or when somebody brings it up just between you and your white friends, you have to be the one to stand up and go, no, don't say that. I know Terrence, and I know I don't want you to speak like that about my friend Terrence.
Exactly. Yeah. That's good. That is good stuff. It's just I think there are just so many things that are moments of hope for us that can spring us forward if we will begin to build those. If we don't have relationships, like you said, get into relationships, and listen to each other. And I think at those times when we have those relationships in place, that when these things like a George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery happen, all of a sudden our antennas are up a little quicker, and we're looking to our friends to say, how are you feeling? What's going on in your life? What's going through your heart? What's going through your mind? And
right.
And just to have that new awareness that this hasn't been right, and I need you to know I'm here for you. And
right.
Those are such key things. I want to come back to one thing before I let you go here, because I know that in the things that you've done with the school assemblies, you have been so effective in reaching into kids' lives, and at moments where they're vulnerable, and so where they could have been contemplating suicide, or they could have been contemplating acts against themselves in some way to harm. And that school assembly, you have found ways to communicate with those kids, that they reach out and they let you know later that they had been contemplating, and now they don't need to do that. And I know I think there's a book that you have based on that. And in this time of pandemic, when all of that has been ripped away, and then you have these kids who are vulnerable, now they don't have the possibility of that contact. I know that some things that I'm reading now is suicide rates have just skyrocketed, because it's even more hopelessness. What are some of the ways that, just to look around us, no matter who they are, that we can? I know you've done some things that you're developing with the school assemblies, or rerouting video, but what do we need to keep in mind in this particular time with especially a vulnerable age group like youth?
Check in. make sure you are checking in, whether it's your students or even maybe your friends have some students, some kids of their own. Check in with them, because this is right now, all of this is the perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's going on. There are lots of things happening in the news. We're literally seeing people die in the streets. People are sick. And it's very easy for not just an adult, but especially for a student to be like, okay, nobody's going to want to hear me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really easy to just shut the doors. I'm going to stay in my room. I'm going to play Call of Duty. And then when they're in that lonely spot, that's when those thoughts and feelings start to come up. Yeah. And it'll come up for even us as adults, like, hey, I'm in this thing by myself. And so I would encourage everybody to check in on somebody.
Yeah.
Don't stay in your world, but check in with somebody else.
Yeah. What are good ways to check in with youth? Texting or Facebook, or what are some ways?
Well, I'm going to shock a lot of people here. For all us older people, your kids, they're not on Facebook anymore.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they have.
Yeah. And that's okay. And so I would just to say that, don't try to check with them on Facebook just because you're like, oh, I'm not getting a message back. They must not want to talk to me. No, they're just not checking it.
They're just not checking it, right. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I would encourage them to just send them a text, give them a FaceTime with them. A lot of times, even with this age group now, they're probably more likely to text you than to actually whether it be face-to-face or a call. Yeah. But send them anyway. Give them a call anyway, because when you look at that missed phone number, you're like, yeah, I probably should call that person, or at least they're checking in on me. I may not want to talk to them right now, but at least somebody's calling me and making me feel important. Mm-hmm. And so definitely making sure to just check in on them and drop a line, whether it's even stopping by, going into that closed door in their room, be like, hey, I love you. My daughters get that all the time. They're like, Dad, I love you. And so
that's good. What's your website? Where can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, it is TerrenceTalley.com. So literally myname.com.
All right. And then what was the book that you wrote?
Yeah, Secrets Anonymous. Okay. And so after an assembly gets done, students will write me their secrets and different things that they're dealing with. And so what we've done is we've taken those secrets from across the country and we put them in a book. And we just separated each issue into different chapters. And so if one kid wrote me something about depression, that's all in the depression chapter. Okay. And you read these people's secrets. We didn't change anything. So there might be some swear words in there. And some of the stories, they don't end positive. But we wanted to keep that, hey, this is what's really going on. Only thing we changed were the names, because it's Secrets Anonymous. So
yeah. Well, I sure appreciate that. I think one of the things that, going forward with is to keep sensitivity to those kids around us. And then also for the things that we've been talking about, even the heavy things. I think one of those things that might be the tendency in letting up the gas is we have, in the majority culture as a white man, I think we have a tendency to say, I just want things to get back to normal. And I just want to encourage people, let's not do that. I live in the state of Alabama, where today a lot of state offices are closed because it's in commemoration of Jefferson Davis's birthday.
No way.
Yeah. And still on the books, still a law. And so I am not interested in going back to normal,
Right.
And we've got work to do, and those are the things that we've got to work on. So,
one last thing.
Sure.
And I don't know how everybody feels about this, but for me, sitting there and watching that video, it has affected me. I will never forget. I've heard some of my white friends that were like, I can't watch that. It's just too much for me. And I'm going to encourage you to watch it.
Yeah.
Because there's some things like the way I explain it to somebody is that's what privilege is. You can choose not to watch that. But for me, I can't choose that because this is what happens to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want this, if you are taking what you're saying to heart,
Mm-hmm.
then you watch that and it's going to stick with you. And if something sticks with you, then you're going to want to do something about it.
Yeah. And for me, with Philando Castile, it was waking up that morning and his girlfriend's video was still live,
Oh,
and it was getting shared. I mean, the live feed had already gone up and it was going viral. And
no way.
and I sat there and watched that, and I'm like, it was just like that. It was just what has gone on in this world,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's like that. And I think we need that. I think we need that impact. There's a point where we feel like we can't walk away, you know.
Yeah.
And we're done with it. Now you're making me cry again, but
I got it. Sure.
Yeah, we need to get to the point where we're just not going to walk away from things, and
Right.
and to be in relationship, and when the conversations get tough, we choose not to walk away from that either.
Right.
And just listen to each other. Man, it has been so good to connect
Oh
with
man.
you again.
Thanks for reaching out to me. I appreciate it. I love talking to you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. So, man, God bless you. Everybody needs to check out terrencetalley.com, and I'll find a way to put it in show notes and stuff to connect, and to get his book and find out what's going on with youth across America. And Terrence, here's to a unique summer, but getting back to school rallies and school assemblies in the fall for you, buddy.
Amen. Yes, I'm missing it.
All right.